Welcome to the Construction Brothers Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Campbell, and with me, like he is every week, my brother, Eddie Campbell.
What's up, Tyler?
Not much, Eddie, and this week, a safety guy speaks. Man, sometimes those intros go good and sometimes they go bad. I had to redo that one. I just get all tongue-tied. It takes a second to,
Only took two.
get wrong. It only took two.
Two's not bad.
Two's not bad. Like, I think we've done 3 or 4 before just because we start getting giggly,
Yeah, the giggle thing that you see
Yeah.
outtakes of that with like actors and stuff.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Well, Terry, thanks for joining us this week. This week, Safety Guy Speaks. You're the safety guy that we are speaking about here. So introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, my name's Terry Dussault, and I'm the president of Yellowknife Consulting Services, and I provide consulting to all different types of clients in construction and try and help them either promote their safety programs or help them with, incident investigations, just generally training and all different types of things that a construction company might need if they don't have a full-time safety person, or if they have a full-time safety person and sometimes they tend to get too busy and they need a little help, like a lifeline. I might come in and help them, that way.
So what kind of projects are we talking about here? Are we talking like tiny little itty bitty things, or are we talking pretty massive structures?
It's really not structures, so to speak. I guess you could say they're mainly environmental projects, cleanup, waste sites, things like that. Or the one thing I've been doing a lot of recently is working in these wastewater treatment facilities where they're doing a lot of infrastructure upgrades because they're sort of outdated. So they're doing a lot of underground, piping, confined space stuff, kind of high risk work. There's a lot of crane work and that kind of stuff with these machines and different pollution abatement systems that they have in these facilities, or just the wastewater treatment systems. There's a lot of big piping and pumps and, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of ways for people to get hurt in these environments. So sometimes a client might just call up and say, hey, I need you to come out and help us with our confined space, give us a refresher, show us how to use these 4 gas meters again. And in some cases, I might stick around and help do the oversight for them.
So wastewater, maybe I'm wrong here, but are you guys getting the like scuba stuff occasionally too? Like somebody has to go underwater and fix things?
I think for the most part, they usually have the capability of like draining out these sediment basins and things like that. So scuba is not too common.
Nah. Okay. Yeah, I've just seen some of those. I'm sorry. I've seen some of those things where you've got a person just going down into what?
It's just the thought of it's just anyway.
The thought of what?
Somebody diving in crap? Yes, scuba diving in wastewater.
Hey, those people make bank, man.
There are a lot of people that make bank for a lot of nasty things. And Mike Rowe made bank on telling their stories. Yeah.
Maybe that's my new call in life. No, I've seen videos of these guys in scuba gear, just like they'll just sink down and just like this nasty, black, gross, I don't know what. And they're going down to fix stuff. So I immediately was thinking of things like that. Like, I wonder if that's part of this. But all right, so we won't have any stories there. That's fine, though. You get a pass.
Okay, good.
So we're here to just hear more about your day-to-day, right? And kind of learn more about what it is to be a safety person out on a job site. What is that like? Give us just kind of a day in your shoes. If you're out on a job site and you're working with people, what does that look like?
So one of the things I've been doing recently is kind of different. As a consultant, you wear a slightly different hat than you would if you're a safety manager at a corporation or a construction company in general. So one of the things that I do is go out and do these weekly site inspections and just make sure that, they're in compliance with, all the OSHA requirements, their company policies, and a lot of times even their client requirements. So let's say you have a project out at a sanitation district. In order for you to get that project, you have to submit a lot of paperwork and documentation before they award you the contract. And basically, they want to find out or make sure that you are capable of first providing all this documentation. And before you ever set foot out there, they have to approve these plans. And sometimes just the safety plans alone are 1,000 pages by the time you're done. So the requirements are pretty rigorous. And so you have to kind of go out and, make sure everybody's, following the protocols. And when you get into some of these facilities, everybody's agenda is slightly different. Now, if they had some kind of a past issue, like one of the projects I'm working on now, they had a worker get pretty seriously injured in a confined space environment. And the guy was really never the same because there was oxygen deprivation. And luckily he lived, but he doesn't walk the same and that kind of thing. So when a company or a client has been stung like that, they're on pins and needles. They don't ever want that to happen again on their watch. So it's important to kind of be proactive on the safety side and do the inspections and just make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. And then providing the documentation at the end of the inspection so that if there are deficiencies, it's identified and then those deficiencies can be addressed. So that's kind of one of the things that I do. I help, I've got a lot of background in environmental mainly. So a lot of the stuff kind of comes easy to me because I've already worked it for many, many years.
I want to hear some there's going to be the good, the bad, the ugly, right? And we like starting out with some of the good things. So what are some of the good things that you see happening in safety right now?
I think one of the things I've noticed a lot is that's really changed over the years. And it's good for people to hear this because I think when I originally got into safety, it was kind of evolving and it was becoming just like more and more. Like when we started working out in the field, it was just, construction boots and, nobody even wore a hard hat or a safety vest. But now it's evolved to the point where you see the younger generation kind of growing into these project manager positions, and it's much easier to get them on board with safety than to try and transform an old salt, somebody that might have, hey, I've been doing it this way for 30 years and nothing bad has ever happened. And so it's hard to change the behavior of a worker like that, especially if they're resistant to safety. Now, on the flip side of that, it's sometimes, they have seen incidents, on their watch. So it makes it a little easier for them to digest, doing more training and being more responsible or proactive with their safety. But I like to see where this younger generation is going with safety and then the things that are available, just the technology that's available right now is much better. The safety gear is better. Everything is much easier. The documentation, everything can be done digitally on your phones and you don't have to have a lot of paperwork. So you have accountability, traceability, which you need if you're ever in a situation where there's litigation or you have to go to depositions and things like that. You need to have traceability. And the only way you can do it is if somebody's documenting. A lot of times in the past, writing a bunch of stuff out on paper, it's difficult for some people. They took construction or decided to get into the construction industry for a reason. Maybe they weren't great at school and they just wanted to, pound nails. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, but I'm very encouraged with what I see out there, and it's exciting,
That's really interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Well,
go ahead. I don't want to cut you off, sir.
I want to
Please.
define traceability just real quick.
Okay,
When we use big words, we're dumb, so we like to. Is this like paper trail? Is that what we're talking about, or something better than paper trail is what we're looking for now?
Well, yeah, you have to have traceability in safety because if there's ever any kind of an incident that occurs, if you're the employer, you have to be able to prove that when you had workers out on a job site, before they started work, they did some kind of a safety meeting. Those things will help you if your case ever goes to litigation, right? And it also helps the worker because there's a system in place for people to be able to talk about the safety topics that matter out on the job site. And if you're running blind and you're just going out every day doing your job and nobody's really talking about the conditions that are constantly changing, maybe today you have trucking and the next day you have, 30 or 40 roofers on your project and they're a subcontractor. You have to have some sort of accountability, and being able to have things on paper. Well, now it's not paper so much, but having that traceability really helps in the long run. So it protects the company, it protects the worker.
I want to dig into something you said about it's easier to train the new generation rather than the old. That's really fascinating to me, because you would think that the older generation who has been in the industry longer would be more in tune with some of the different, like, catastrophic things that can happen on a job site and want to push for safer working environments consistently as a result of that. Like our dad, for instance, we talk about confined spaces, and we've shared the story, where he lost 3 guys on a job site due to a confined space incident. And like that has stuck with him for years, rightfully so. So it's funny to me that, like, you're saying, like, the older generation is a lot harder to get on board with this stuff than the younger generation. I would think it would be flip-flopped. So, I mean, can you dig into that a little bit more? Tell us kind of where they're resistant.
Yeah, I think, it depends on the individual, but I'll give you an example. Like I was out on a job site probably a month ago, and a worker is doing a bunch of work, and I look at his hands, and his hands are dirty. They're filthy dirty, and it tells me he isn't wearing gloves. The company has a glove policy. So when I called him out on it and I said, hey, how did your hands get so dirty? How come you're not wearing gloves? And he said, Terry, he goes, I can't wear gloves. I just can't. And I said, well, it's a company policy, you kind of have to follow the policy, right? And you're setting an example for other workers, because he's an older worker, right? And so I said, you have a bunch of young guys out here and you're training them. And if they see you working without gloves, what are they going to do? You have to kind of like set the example. He goes, I have sensory issues with my fingers and, my hands. And I said, well, I get what you're saying, but I said, I don't think that's defensible. And when you continuously work doing it the wrong way, or you're not following the company protocols, eventually something will happen. So as I start digging in and talking to him a little bit, he even showed me, he goes, yeah, look, he goes, I haven't worked with gloves for a long time. And he goes, look at my finger. He shows me his finger, and he's got a big scar on there where he had an injury to his hand. So I told him, all you can do really is I try and coach him and say, look, you're not following the policy. And, I did a really in-depth study years ago on hand injuries. And my brother happens to be a paramedic, and he has this book that he started way back when he began being as a paramedic. And we called it the Book of Gore. And he wanted to document a lot of things or, calls that he went on. And one day I'm at his house and I picked this thing up. I go, what is this? It's an old photo album. He goes, that's the Book of Gore. I picked it up, started going through it, and there was a couple hand injuries in there that were pretty gruesome. The point is, you only get one set of hands. So, I just said, I don't advise doing that. And there's usually a glove type for every different type of task. And most of them are very comfortable. There's really no excuse not to, or to work without gloves, I think. So that's all you can do is try and coach them along. But I don't like the fact that, you have a bunch of younger workers out there and they're seeing this behavior. So when I do incident investigations, I have to dig in sometimes and find root causes in order to close out the investigation. You have to find the root causes, the causal factors, and then you implement solutions. One of the root causes, it's kind of rare actually, it's not a common one, but it is shortcutting procedures is positively reinforced or tolerated. So really what that means is if I'm your supervisor and I see you doing something that's unsafe and I don't say anything, I'm saying it's okay. That's the message you're sending. It's important that we're all, kind of looking out for each other's safety, but if you're the foreman or the super, you have to kind of take responsibility.
Do you want to play devil's advocate, or should I?
Well,
No.
I
Okay,
will
all
let
right.
you. My question, as I'm like trying to basically interrupt you, you're answering it already. My phrasing of it would have been, how does the visible hypocrisy of somebody in a leadership position create opportunity for incidents, right? So, I mean, which is exactly what you were just saying, is that the leadership's permissive. So your foreman is permissive and doesn't set the example. So their hypocrisy creates opportunity, and then that opportunity creates the path that, the incident went right down. So you got ahead, you answered, man. You're like, we got some telepathy going on or something. Pretty awesome.
I'll ask this question more as like we've experienced this in the past. With technology going out on job sites more and more, we're having to use touchscreens, right? And for a lot of people that use gloves, that can be a very difficult thing to interact with the screen if you're wearing a glove. Have you seen anybody navigate that well? Because it's like, you don't want to look like a hypocrite where it's like, I can't use my gloves because I'm using a touchscreen. Like, how are you guys navigating little kind of loopholes like that? It's not the same as a person out here that's a rod buster. It's somebody that's doing technical work. How do you guys navigate that?
Yeah, the way I would approach that myself is from a practical sense, that if you are doing paperwork or you're doing something that requires that kind of dexterity, like if even the equipment operators, I don't expect an equipment operator to wear gloves. If it's easier for them to maintain control of the machine without the gloves on. And even I've had conversations about hard hats in the cab of heavy equipment and things like that. You have to be, I think, as a safety person, you have to be practical in what you're asking people to do. If they have to do paperwork or work with a touchscreen, take the gloves off. Obviously, you can't really use a touch screen very well with gloves on.
Yeah, I think you have to be practical. I think there's some out there that will just go to the letter of the law, be like, that's the mandate. That's it. You're supposed to be wearing gloves the whole time. And it's like, well, okay, but come to me a little bit. But even if we're going back over into a situation where this is somebody that is a laborer, somebody that is doing heavy work, lifting, tying things, doing all of that, you definitely need to reinforce that for sure. I'm sure that's got to be super frustrating though when people don't listen to it. How what's a good way to navigate somebody not listening to you when you're asking them to do something for their safety?
Yeah, well, as a consultant, I can only advise, the client that there's a problem with a repeat offender, more or less. And then they will have to decide how they want to deal with it, because, you have to have teeth in your safety program. So if somebody is knowingly not following the protocols, that's up to the employer and HR to figure out how they want to navigate it. But not dealing with it and letting it go is not the right thing to do. There's a way to get people on board, and it takes a while sometimes, but overall I feel like some of the younger guys that are out there and gals, they buy in. I'm out at airports doing projects out there, and everybody's wearing their PPE and they're doing the right thing, and they're following the protocols. So it's that I like. Just seeing the level of safety across the board is nice.
I've seen the shift in my career. I mean, there's a big difference walking out on a site now. Even just what's expected, I mean, when we started, it was like, bring a hard hat. And now PPE, I think it gained prevalence like that. Even those letters being, meaning something to everybody, bring your PPE, that started meaning something maybe halfway through the 20 years I've been in this. It's interesting. And it's also interesting. OSHA, you kind of say, well, I'm keeping the letter of the law. OSHA has this whole competent person thing that comes up, and, judgment comes up a lot. And so I like the practicality with which you're saying we need to approach safety, because I think if we don't approach safety with practicality, people cast it aside because they feel that it's nonsense. It's stupid. Why would I put giant gloves on my hands to try to operate a tablet?
Yeah. And then they almost intentionally will go out of their way to go against the letter of the law.
Yeah,
you know
get a
what I
little
mean?
vindictiveness.
Stick it to the man sort of thing starts happening, I feel like.
Sure. And I'm sure trying to engage people culturally. I mean, trying to get a cultural shift within a company is probably a lot of your mission and goal, is get this cultural shift where leadership and everybody's bought in.
Yeah. And kind of going back to what we were talking about with gloves, I remember way back, probably 2002 or 2003, we were doing some work for an oil company, and I helped do the installation of some groundwater treatment systems. In the installation process, once we got everything done, then we have to do the system shakedown, start everything up, start the pumps, run water through the carbon vessels, and then check everything. And so you're basically, processing contaminated groundwater, which I have background in that. But the oil company was basically saying, look, if you want to do work on our projects, these are the safety protocols that you're going to have to follow. And one of the things that really didn't go over very well, especially with me, is they wanted us to wear gloves over gloves. And I thought, okay, now this is getting stupid. And so they sort of break it down. It's like, you want me to put 2 gloves on each hand to do my work? Where is this coming from? It took me a while to kind of figure out what the main issue was, but we were dealing with contaminated groundwater that has a lot of bad things in it, like tertiary butyl alcohol and MTBE, all those additives that were in gasoline. And so they said you can absorb it through your skin. So even if you're using gloves, a regular pair of gloves, if you get your hands wet, it's going to saturate through the glove, and you're going to absorb it, because you can absorb contaminants through the skin. They said, we want you to put disposable gloves on underneath your regular gloves. Once we started doing it, it wasn't really that bad. And then I learned that, for those small tasks that I was talking about where you need that dexterity, I don't mind using the disposable gloves. And when I look at my hands now, compared to how they looked when I first started my career, I mean, my hands had calluses and now they don't even look like the same set of hands, because, over the years I've sort of adapted to wearing those gloves, and I see where they were coming from, because some of the contaminants on these job sites that I've been on are pretty nasty. And you don't even want to get it on your skin, it's that bad.
Let's change gears just a little bit here and talk about, so we talked about the good. I feel like we've talked about some of the bad. What are some of the things that you wish more contractors, more owners would implement on jobs to be safer? What are some of the changes that you feel like we could make as an industry to better support and develop safety culture?
Well, I think where I see a lot of opportunity is for management to be more proactive and get involved with the crews. Because a lot of times with safety programs, and it depends on, the maturity of the company and, how many people there are and that type of thing. But a lot of times they expect a worker to go out and work safe, or they'll tell you, yeah, go out and do it safely. But they're not really providing all the tools and resources for how to do that. For example, let's say a contractor consistently underbids jobs, and then they expect the crew to go out and perform the work, meet production, and all that kind of thing, and be safe. But when a person doesn't have all the right resources, what are they going to do first? They start cutting corners. They rush the job. They try and do work, like let's say they're trying to lift things, the wrong way because they don't have a reach lift or a forklift. And so what happens is you're sort of saying you want them to work safe, but you're not really providing them everything. And when an owner or a manager goes out to the site and they can see where the difficulties are, I think it changes them. And it will help them learn, like, okay, maybe we need to bid these jobs a little fatter, put some money in there for safety and that kind of thing. And I remember years ago having this challenge because I worked at a company and we had a lot of project managers, and everybody's conscientious about their budget because they get bonuses and this kind of thing. So the first thing they start to do is they start sniveling about the amount of time and money it costs to have the safety guy go out and do site visits, and we're charging time to their projects, or we're saying, look, you need more PPE and that kind of thing. They see that financial impact and they start complaining about it. And I said, look, I'm the safety guy. Your budget, that's your problem. However you bid this job or whoever bid it, and then I started realizing, wait, we need to have some internal discussions, because the problem is it's not one project manager. This is across the board. So I figured out a formula for how much money they need to add to the bids to cover all the safety costs. That would be PPE, training, and everything. And I said, okay, just add this number. And I think we came up with, for the projects we were working on, it was only like 0.3% to some of these projects. And because they had so many projects, it covered everything. And that way, every project paid the same amount of money, but it covered everything. And then there's no real reason to complain. So if the project starts losing money somewhere else, the safety stuff was already covered in there. And I also remember like another situation where I had to send these guys in a slop tank. Okay, so there's this refinery that was in a kind of in a residential area. And as that area grew, the community didn't like the fact that this private refinery was there, and they put a lot of pressure on. They ended up shutting this place down. And they used to have all these giant oil tanks out there. So the regulatory agency said, okay, you have to systematically, you need to take these tanks down and da-da-da-da-da. So one of the very last tank that was on this site was a giant slop tank, where the owner of the refinery in the last days of operating allowed waste disposal companies to come in and just dump a bunch of yuck, we'll call it, into this tank. So it's a mixture of all kinds of stuff. Nobody knows. And now the thing's half full, and they hired the company that I was working for to remove the slop, all the liquid. We had to figure out a way to solidify it and all that. But we had to end up like cutting a hole in the side of the tank, and we brought in soil and started, solidifying it. But we had to put people in that tank. I had to put 3 guys in there. And so they were in full SCBA. We had to modify skid steers with tanks and, have emergency air and all this kind of thing. And the project manager, before the job even started, was asking, Terry, how long is it going to take before we are going to be out of level A PPE? Because I don't want to pay for that. It's expensive. And I said, well, it's not going to happen. Every minute there's somebody in that tank with slop in there, we have to have them in full level A PPE, because we don't know if there's biodegradation in there. There's all kinds of chemicals. They could move something, and then all of a sudden now you have hydrogen sulfide or mercaptans. There's a lot of ways somebody could die in there. And we're not going to shortcut on the PPE. And if we need to elevate this conversation to somebody else, we will. But there's no way I'm sending anybody in there with and not having all the right things, because I'm responsible as the lead safety person at a company. I have a level of responsibility, not to just the workers, but I could go to jail if I send them in there and I don't do the right thing. People don't think about those things, but look at the Blue Water Horizon oil spill. People went to jail for that, and that you're starting to see a lot more of that these days. So I don't want to be in the crosshairs of having to go to jail because somebody got hurt, or you said, hey, we need to implement these solutions, and the solutions don't get implemented, and you go about your business as a safety manager anyway, you can be held liable for that. So those are the things that keep me up at night, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges.
Some things are an obvious safety issue where, you know, a confined space or a trench or something of this nature, and maybe trench less so because there are an unfortunate number of events with those, but where a fatality seems a little more apparent to the average worker. Like, I don't want to go down in that. Or when you say there's something bad down there, it's believable. There are other things, though, that we've seen put in practice on job sites. Say, for example, carrying a 16-foot 2x4 requiring 2 men minimum that seem
It was a 10-foot.
It was a
10-foot.
Okay, so how do you?
2x4.
I want you to weigh some opinion on that. Like, do we shoot ourselves in the foot for the things that we need to be strong on and we need to have a voice on because we are saying the sky is falling too much? Like, is there a little bit of a Chicken Little routine with safety that has driven people in, like, when you need to be heightened, you need to be more aware, you need to be more vigilant, but we've created vigilance about everything, so there's vigilance about, you know, less, I'm not going to say nothing, but less things. Do you think that there's any impact to that?
Yes, absolutely. I think we shoot ourselves in the foot a lot. It depends a lot with, like, where is it coming from? Like you said, the 16-foot 2x4, or like maybe an example I could give you is I've done a lot of projects for oil companies, and one of the sensitive points that this particular client had was spills. And so they were saying to themselves, any spill over 10 gallons, they're going to consider it a major spill. Like, they had different classifications, right? Part of the problem was that you're kind of like setting the expectation to where now if there's a spill that's, 10 gallons or more, it's going to trigger a series of events that goes all the way up the food chain in some of these oil companies, in a facility where you're pumping thousands of gallons of groundwater every day, or sometimes, every day, we'll say. It's not really that uncommon to have a 10-gallon spill. And as long as the spill is contained, or it's within secondary containment, it shouldn't really be a big deal. But it is. They made it that way. So now you have a contractor out there, let's say, and they are going to replace some 3-inch piping that leads to a treatment system that's supposed to have been evacuated with the vac truck so that when the plumbers come in, they could change the piping and the valves, and it's supposed to be cold and dark. There's nothing in it. And the guys get out there, and the first cut they make, there's a spill. And when they signed their contract, they believed that the piping was evacuated already and there was nothing in it. So the contractor for the oil company that's out there has already had 3 or 4 spills. So now they're already very sensitive because they know that they could potentially lose the contract if they have another spill out there. So what do? They have another spill, but now they try and blame my client, trying to say that it's their fault that the spill occurred. And then, my client said, hey, Terry, can you come out? They want to do this high-level incident investigation, and they're going to have people on this call from, I don't know what state it was. So I go out there at like 6 a.m, and the first thing the safety guy says for the client is, we don't want to assign blame to this. Let's just start off that way. We just want to do fact finding and figure out, how we can move forward, lessons learned kind of thing. So in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I know this is going to go a different direction, but I keep my mouth shut. We do this whole hour-long thing, and I'm not saying anything. And then at the very end, they try and start steering why it happened. And they were trying to say that my client didn't follow their activity hazard analysis for the job. And as soon as I heard him going down that road, I stopped the guy and I said, sir, do you mind if I say something real quick? And he said, sure. And so I said, okay, well, I know that in normal incident investigations, I've done a lot of them. And many times you look at the AHA, the activity hazard analysis for how to do that job safely. That usually comes up a lot. But in this case, when they signed the contract, it said that those pipes were supposed to be evacuated. So the AHA for their task does not apply here. The AHA for the task that your worker, who basically said he evacuated the lines with a third party, that applies to you, but it doesn't apply to my client. And I knew where he was going with it, because if they had one more spill that was their fault, they could potentially lose $1 million contract or multi-million-dollar contract. So at the very conclusion of this discussion, I tried to be very polite and, talk it through. But I said, would you do me a favor? At the conclusion of your final investigation, would you send me a copy of the final investigation report? The reason I said that is because a lot of times when companies have an incident that happens, a serious incident, there's, as much as people may not want to admit this or face the reality of it, sometimes there's two different incidents or incident reports. There's a forward-facing one that goes out to a certain group of people, and the internal one might be slightly different. And the reason I asked him for that final investigation is because I just wanted to make sure that it didn't end up going to the oil company and having my client's name in there associated with it without us knowing about it. Because my job is to protect, my clients. Sometimes there's a lot of, politics and things like that, and you have to try and navigate your way through it.
Definitely seems that way. So I want to kind of steer us into more of a close here, but there are two questions before we get to our megaphone that I want to kind of throw out at you, right? So the first one is, speak to younger safety people in the industry that are just getting started, or they might be 10 years in, or however. Speak to them, give them some wisdom from your perspective. What is something that they could be focused on and doing better? Give them advice. I want to hear from you on that.
Yeah, so I guess the best advice I could give is to try and learn to do your job and be the best you can be. So if you're a plumber, try and learn the trade as best you can and be the best, but also think about incorporating a level of safety in with your trade. Integrate it and take responsibility for your own safety. But there's a lot of value in learning the safety side of it. If you're going to be an expert, learn it all, because the work that you're doing now, it matters, and doing it safely, it matters. And there's a lot of people that are out there that can do the trades, and they don't give safety a second thought. And the reason it's important is because people do get hurt. I had a very close coworker of mine. She lost her 23-year-old brother. He was, a warehouse worker, and he fell through a skylight, and he didn't have the proper training and knowledge, to be up on the roof of this place. He was trying to cover the skylight so water wouldn't leak through during the rains. And his boss sent him up there, and he had the can-do attitude. And it's okay to have that can-do attitude, but make sure you have the level of safety to back it up, because I see with a lot of younger workers too, they want to prove themselves. Some of them want to prove how willing they are to help in that kind of thing. And sometimes that can get you into trouble. It's okay if you don't know something, or if you're not sure, ask. But if you're trying to build your career and develop yourself in your trade, integrate safety and, have some personal policies about safety. Because sometimes, people just have never really given it a second thought. But I can tell you the loss of a loved one in a workplace incident. I saw the look on her face, my coworker's face, every day. And one day I had her looking up some OSHA statistics, and she happened to come across the death of her brother on the website, the OSHA website. And I looked over, she was at her computer, and there's tears streaming down her face. And I'm telling you, that really, didn't sit well with me, just seeing that, like that level of grief. And, that's why it's important to take safety serious, I think. You could save a life, even your own.
I feel like that might be close to our megaphone here, but let me ask it anyway. All right. So, if we gave you a megaphone to speak to the whole industry, what would you want to leave the industry with, man? What would you want to say?
One thing, that you could do is, as a worker, just if you see something and it doesn't feel right, stop or say something. You don't have to proceed. This is kind of what I was saying a minute ago about having a personal policy about safety. Where do you stand on it? You have to ask yourself the question, where do you stand on your personal safety? Take responsibility for your own safety, and don't be afraid to speak up if something doesn't feel right. And some people don't have that confidence level for different reasons. I worked with people for years where, they're just quiet. They don't say much. But, that sometimes you could be out on a job and you can feel it when something isn't adding up, and it doesn't smell right, look right. In most serious accidents that occur on job sites, there was some kind of a lead up. People didn't feel safe, and for some reason they proceed anyway, and then that's when something happens. So it's okay to stop, ask for help, or if you're not comfortable with something, just don't do it.
Good word, man. Good word. Well, Terry, thanks for joining us this week, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it. Glad to be on, and I appreciate it very much.